And also thinking about ways to analyze texts that maybe do hold more harmful ideas or problematic, I guess I'll say, and being able to still analyze and engage them by sort of picking apart where those anxieties come from, right? Like, oh, this author's fear of racial mixing is why they have created these like hybrid human demon characters as a way to like demonstrate what they think is like the ultimate horror in, an increasingly diverse society.
Welcome back to another episode of Truth to Power. Truly appreciate you all tuning back into another episode as always. And I have a great guest today, Dr. Chloe Hunt. He's a professor of African American literature here at USF. I will turn it over to her to say a few words to you all.
Hi, I'm Dr. Hunt, and I've been teaching at USF for this is my fourth year, and I teach African American literature.
Cool. Well, we'll go ahead and get right into it and thinking about your topic that you study. So for people meeting you for the first time, how would you describe like what you teach and then also like what you study?
Usually I just sort of say that I teach African American literature. I'm most interested in teaching like 20th century African American literature, contemporary African American literature, and my research is in Black speculative fiction, which
Gotcha.
is basically Black literature that is fantasy, science fiction, horror. So I also like to teach those classes. And I tend to teach a mix of classes for, the gen ed requirements and the African American Studies minor, and then also just the English department. Mm-hmm.
Cool. And then like as far as like your path to becoming a professor, like what were some of those things that like really made it feel like this would be the lane that you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, it's one of those things that now this is what I do. It feels like this is like the only thing I was ever going to do, like looking back, but it didn't feel that way. I was lucky enough to have like a really good scholarship when I went to college, and one of the things I told myself, which sounds like I was really mature at that age, but I but really wasn't.
Uh-huh.
But I was just like, okay, if I don't have to worry about like the return on investment here, I want to give myself the opportunity to study what I like. 'Cause I think that's just a unique position. Most people I grew up with either were in college or were like really trying to figure out how to like, sort of maximize the amount of money that they were putting into school.
Yeah.
And so I was just like, I'm going to try to take classes that I like. And almost all of them ended up being like writing, literature, and African American studies and education.
Yeah.
So I ended up with an African American studies minor, an education minor, and a major in English. And I just loved reading. And so, but for a while I was thinking about like doing stuff in nonprofits, doing stuff at like the high school level. And so after I graduated, I worked at a restaurant for a long time, just like making pizza. I walked dogs. I was took a job basically through an AmeriCorps program where I was doing college prep for high school students, and I really loved working with high school students.
Yeah.
But the thing about high school students is because you're still like minors, there's like limitations in terms of like what you can teach. You're worried about like, you don't want parents to be upset that you taught a text like,
Right.
it's
Yeah,
just like
something that
you
was
don't
just
have full
inappropriate.
autonomy. The
Yeah.
curriculum's a little bit more narrow. And I was really excited about thinking about those students when they would get to college, right? Because my work with them was like getting them to college. And I started thinking also about just like I missed being in a classroom and I missed learning with kind of some pressure, not just like
Yeah.
self-learning. And I was missing like those conversations, like when you're in a room with people who enjoy just talking about like big ideas and chewing on things. And so I started thinking about grad school, and I wanted to do African American studies because as much as I like my English degree, one of the things that was missing there for me was just Black faculty and like to be honest, I kind of felt like no matter what I said, people were like, "That's brilliant,"
Mhm.
because I was the one person talking about Black people.
Yeah. And what school did you go to, by the way?
I went to the University of Puget Sound, which is in Tacoma.
Okay. So
Mhm.
further up north.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, yeah, I had, like, a really great experience there, but I just, like, I needed more of that, and I wanted to be around, like, Black professors who would tell me that when I was wrong and challenge me to do more, and so I ended up going to the University of Massachusetts. They have an African American Studies PhD. There's not many PhD programs in African American Studies.
Mhm.
And it's a unique department. It was sort of founded out of protests. Students occupied a building,
Hmm.
like demanded
Yeah.
that they
The
hire faculty.
Yeah.
So, for example, our chair, John Bracey, who since passed, but he was a like activist and organizer. He didn't come through with like a traditional path. And so, yeah, it like really changed everything for me because I was already excited to be in school, but then I started thinking about just how rare of an opportunity that was. And I wanted to pursue teaching primarily just from those experiences. And I had a lot of opportunities to teach in grad school.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, and I ended up here, which was lucky because I just wanted to be back on the West Coast. I did not enjoy being in Massachusetts, at least in Amherst. And yeah, and that's how I ended up here.
Yeah, cool. And then just like to kind of hone in on like the USF setting, what have been like some of those things that like I feel like, you know, as a teacher, you're in a spot where you're learning a lot. So what are those things that like being at USF specifically has taught you in your educational journey as far as just like how you approach it? Maybe it might just be like how the students are or things like that, but just trying to see like from specifically USF, like since you've been here, what have been some of those things or ways that you've grown as a professor?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, one of the things what I was excited about when I came here was just the diversity of the student body. When I had been teaching before, I was teaching African American Studies classes, but to predominantly white students.
Gotcha.
I worked with a program that's similar to the Black Scholars Program here, but at UMass, and where I would teach writing. And that was like the one class I would have was like all Black students. And when I first came here, I think it shifted how I was teaching the material because sometimes you come from you're like anticipating student defenses. Like the first class I ever taught in my life in a college, I was leading a discussion section for a history of the civil rights movement class. And the first class session, this kid raised his hand and was like, "Why aren't we talking about how Black people sold themselves into slavery?" And this is like me, you know,
Like first.
you can imagine, like, I know I already look like young. Like, this is me, like, as like a baby professor. And I was just, I think I handled it well. I like tried to just be like, number one, that's literally not what we're talking about right now. And also, like, I think you're like severely underinformed in terms of like what slavery is. And I gave him some book names and I was like, you know, you should read how like Europe underdeveloped Africa. You should read about these things. I think that you would like provide context. But it was like it shapes how you teach when you walk into a classroom and you know that those kinds of students, whether they're raising their hand or not, are sort of like looking for ways to. And again, this is not common. I don't think most students are like this, but it wasn't uncommon for me to meet students who I felt like were waiting for me to say something or do something. And so it puts you on the defensive. It makes you more sort of guarded. You don't want to let too much of yourself into the classroom. You really need to like focus on professionalism and like, so being here, I think it was nice because the students here are really respectful. I never had to remind students that I'm the professor here. But they are friendly and warm and kind. And so it allowed me to be a bit more of myself just in the room and also I think teach from a more like authentic point of view, which is like, this is what I want to read. These are the discussions I want to have. You know, there's still boundaries and there's still a level of professionalism, but I don't have to worry about like, if I don't say this in this exact way, this student is going to jump in to try to like have a debate with me.
Yeah, no, for sure. I can imagine like how that would like or affect like performance, but then also like the enjoyment of the job if you're just like always on the defense. And it's
Yes.
like your job is to literally like, you know, create a safe space for people to like learn. So yeah, I can imagine like how that would be like challenging, but I'm glad that, you know, here at USF, you know, you can relax and
Yeah.
really just be yourself.
Yeah.
But that story that you were telling actually transitions nicely into like what we were talking about before with like this concept of like, um, a lot of the times, like on the internet, you know, if somebody is underinformed or something, the answer is just to tell them, you know, read more. But thinking about like, specifically like African American literature, what is like that value that you can get from reading more African American literature from beyond just like, you know, just giving people book titles, but like, what are we really trying to like get at when we go back and maybe not even just like in the past, but when we look at literature specifically?
Yeah. I mean, I think that there's a lot of reasons to read.
Mm,
Um, One of the reasons, like when I'm talking about just books in general, I think, and I try to sort of emphasize this when I'm teaching, is that we don't need to reinvent the wheel.
mm,
And if we're specifically talking about Black people and the writing that Black people have done, it's like other people have asked these questions, looked for answers, been in conversation, organized, documented, and then 50 years later, people want to come up with an idea and are asking the same question.
mm,
And to me, it's a thing of like continuity. It's also
mm.
about being in conversation with the things that have happened before, but also it's about like some work has already been done. Like people have already thought through some of these
Right.
questions,
Yeah.
And so, if you're like, well, if Black feminists do this, then like what happens with men and children, right? And it's like people have already done this writing. Like you can actually just answer that question by like going and reading something. So I think there's to me a sense of just recognizing that like my ideas and my thoughts are already in conversation with people, and that
Mm,
reading to me allows me to like place myself in those conversations
mhm.
and also help shape how I think about things. I think it's important to know what I disagree with, what makes me uncomfortable,
Yeah.
what seems like really resonant, and then it kind of sharpens your own ideas about the world. But then with literature, with fiction, I think it's just also about one of the things that's really interesting about literature is how much you can learn about everything through literature.
Mm,
Like sometimes I joke that half of what I know about history is just me reading fictional books.
mhm.
But I just learn, you learn about random things. If there's a character who's a chef, you might learn about, wine or food or whatever.
All right.
But I think when it comes to like, if you really want to understand Black history, Black culture, I think engaging with the literature gives you so many different perspectives.
Mm,
And
mm,
also those mundane details about everyday life that I think people um, sometimes overlook when,
mm.
because it can sometimes unintentionally be a bit dehumanizing when you talk about the past as if,
It's
you
just
know,
dates
yeah, it's
and
just dates. And it's like there are
figures.
people and they're
Yeah.
doing things and there's larger context
Mhm.
to things. Like, I don't know, do you remember the conversations after Sinners came out? And there was many conversations, but one of the conversations was about passing, like the concept of
Mhm.
racial passing. And I thought it was a really interesting conversation, but one of the things I think was interesting is people were taking a kind of black and white approach to it. Like
Mm.
either this person is passing, um, or they're not, or like passing either means you're like pretending to be white because if you acknowledge that you're Black, then you're not passing.
Mm.
Um, but so many Black writers have written about their experiences passing, both like, autobiographically, but also fictionally.
Mhm.
And I think that when you engage with texts like that, you can see more of like the spectrum of
Yeah.
these experiences and nuances, which means that when you talk about a contemporary film, you just are more informed than someone who is encountering this idea for the first time or looks
Right.
up the dictionary definition. which only can tell you so much, you know?
Yeah, for sure. And I was actually about to ask a question, but I feel like you already were answering it because I was curious if you could explain like a little bit more about for Black communities specifically, what does the literature allow us to do beyond history or social media or like journalism?
Mm-hmm.
But I think a lot of what you were saying of like the nuance and being able to get specific perspectives
Mm-hmm.
on what was happening like in times in history is like really where you can kind of get like that value that only literature can give you.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing that's coming up for me is how we took time to because we did African American literature in one. So this was
Mm-hmm.
from like the period of enslavement all the way up to like Harlem Renaissance,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So actually being able to like go back and read narratives of enslaved people
Mm-hmm.
is kind of, I think what I'm getting at here of like, yeah, you could learn in a history class that between these years, these things are happening. But when you are literally like looking at somebody's full story from
Mm-hmm.
the coast of Africa to, you know, the east coast of the United States, like you get to see like this, or you get to like get those images of like what it might have smelled like,
Mm-hmm.
or what it might have sounded like, or how somebody might be feeling in that moment that I really feel like specifically textbooks, and kind of like what you were saying earlier with like how there's kind of like that gap of how you can authentically teach something to
Mm-hmm.
like kids based off their age. I think they leave out a lot of like that agency that would make you connect the dots and be like,
Mm-hmm.
hey, like this is a larger
Yes.
overarching
Yes.
issue that, like you were saying earlier, didn't just start today.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think, you know, I was gonna ask you that question, but I really do feel like you
Yeah.
kind of already like hit that nail on
But
the
the
head.
slave narrative is a good point because I think that is a period of history where even people who think that slavery is abhorrent see the image of like, at least when I was in school, I like remember the exact image it's, you know, the popular image of like a man's back with like the scar.
Hmm.
And then there was a little blurb about like punishment basically.
Yeah.
But when we read a narrative, it's like those are people. They like dream and laugh and have
Hmm.
family. They might be in love with someone. They have a favorite food, right? Like these are people.
Yeah, my thing is always like, if we were just 250
Yes,
years back, like that's
exactly.
you.
Yes,
Like,
yeah, they're not a different species of person. They're
yeah.
us. It's just the like timeline that you're born on.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that actually kind of transitions into like this question that I've really been, in a larger sense, I would say maybe since around like 2020 when I started this
Mm-hmm.
podcast, I've been like wrestling with. But it's really about, I guess, like the seriousness that Black folk have with, I guess, our history or our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess, to ask it plainly, it's like when a student takes your class seriously, let's say like this is like a student who maybe is not like that educated on like
Mm-hmm.
Black history or, you know, things in the past. If they come in your class and they take it seriously, in what ways would that change like how they view their Blackness and how they interact with the world because of that?
Mm-hmm.
I think, for a little bit more context, I'm thinking about the person who might not necessarily view race as a salient part of like
Mm-hmm.
their identity, and somebody who might just, you know, be, yeah, I'm just going through the world as me, not
Mm-hmm.
necessarily thinking about like the sociological aspects of like what it means to be like a Black person.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, like if they in the beginning of the year, you know, sit down in your class and they really take it seriously, what can they really gain as far as like that Black perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good question, and also like I was someone who, um, I like never questioned my Blackness, but I think I found it hard to see myself in like mainstream kind of representations
Mm.
of Blackness at
Hmm.
times, which didn't really make me feel any kind of way. I just like kind of noticed it.
Hmm.
But I think it was through literature that I really, and this is what I hope students will get from my class, is that there's no one experience of Blackness, right?
Yes.
Like anyone who's thinking about how where they are born, the color of their skin, their relationship to the diaspora is engaged in Black thought, even if they're not, you know, in the cities or the places where we historically think Black people are supposed to be,
Hmm.
even if they're, you know, in another country while they're writing, even if they are, you know, queer at a time where queerness is not accepted, right? Like those are still a part of the Black history and Black experiences.
Sure.
So I think to see yourself Because one of the things that I think you get from literature is that we don't get in most mainstream representations of Blackness is the like internality, right? Like people thinking for themselves, right? The thing that's interesting about especially visual representations, it's really hard to
internalize that.
suggest what's happening internally, right? So people have to say out loud. Sometimes there might be voiceover or something. But to see that people are thinking, right? Or looking back at something, critiquing that there's like duality between how you present yourself and what you're thinking about, which all of us know is true. But I think if you haven't really engaged with Black thinkers or Black thought, you might feel like your own sense of consciousness is like not remarkable or not worth discussing. But I think everyone's is really. Like everyone has interesting thoughts. But taking those thoughts seriously it's easier said than done. And I think when you're reading other people's thinking and writing and characters who think and feel and are making choices, you can kind of see yourself engaged with that, you know? And through that being like, okay, there's not one singular experience, there's not one singular way of thinking or discussing this. And to sort of honor and respect the work that has been done that allows someone like me to like take a broader approach to thinking about some of these questions, because my humanity is not at stake in the same way that people who came before me. You know, there's definitely still so much work to be done, but like, I'm not in a position where I have to write to explain that I'm human, right? That's not the position I'm in. So I think that just also respecting why race is so salient for so many people, like the importance of it is to like engage with that history and the ideas that have come before you too.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to like get your verbiage for it right, but I think you say you don't have to like defend your humanity as much. I really want to steal that because I was just thinking about it is like a very delicate like balance between like obviously there are like contemporary challenges that we're having, but I always think back to like how we were saying earlier, you know, like our ancestors are us, just like in a different time, and thinking about the way that like they did have to like defend their humanity. I don't know. I was just thinking about how earlier we were talking about like the difference between us as contemporary Black folk and like how we think about like our ancestors. So I just really want to like make sure I intentionally remember like we don't have to defend our humanity as much, because I think that's a good like I'm very particular about like language and like how we refer to things. So it's kind of unrelated, but I just wanted to say that like I'm still in that.
I'm glad. It's yeah. I think it's just like that to me is the distinction. It's like you know, there's a whole bunch of stuff that I still have to deal with, but I don't feel the burden of that. 99.9% of the time.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, cool. But I think that also kind of sparked a question about like the structure of your classes. Because we kind of talked about like what people can get from a class, but I think just looking, you know, peeling the roof off of it, looking from a high level structure. As far as like I know we did like a lot of like discussion groups, or like, you know, like we might do like a little reflection, or you might just be sitting up there lecturing. I'm just kind of curious, like, how do you structure your classes, and then how do you kind of think about like the flow of the semester and like the topics? Like, how are you thinking about putting those things together?
That's like one of the most fun parts about teaching is like you just are. I mean, I don't know if other people feel this way, but when you make a syllabus, it's like, okay, there's this thing I want to teach largely, and then I'm trying to figure out the best way to meet a certain set of objectives. And then there's also just like who I am as a person, my like pedagogical approach and like why I do things the way that I do. And one of the things that's really important to me, and I wonder if you felt like this in class, but I try my best to let other people steer sort of the direction of the discussion, because with literature especially, it really doesn't matter what I think. Like, I think if I was a historian and I was sort of telling you what happened when, it would make sense that I would be in the front and I would be lecturing and you guys would be taking notes.
Yeah.
But outside of the contextual information of the historical period or stuff about the author, the work of reading is work that you have to do in order for you to say, I got out of this class and I can read, analyze, interpret, and write about literature on my own, right? If you leave my class and you still want to know what I think before you can write it down, then I feel like I haven't done my job, right? And I think it's hard to build this skill of just valuing your own thoughts. That's what I want students to just be like, I'm interpreting this and my interpretation has value because it's my interpretation, right? And I'm confident in it because I've taken my time to read this carefully and to analyze what's here and bring myself into it. And now I can talk about myself. I can talk about my own Blackness with more facility than if I had not been in this class.
Yeah.
So I often am thinking about how texts can kind of connect so that I can build on certain themes, right? So, for example, in African American Lit 1, that's a difficult class to teach because it's really heavy, the material.
Yeah.
There's almost no levity in the class. And it's interesting because I like to have fun. And one of the reasons I love about teaching like my class on Black horror is it's a fun class. Like people are excited to talk about and read fun, scary things. But that class is there's a seriousness with it. And so I think one of the things I try to do is structure it so that even if we're serious, there's a little bit of like reprieve. Like there's a way that you can just stay in slavery and you can, and I know you're aware of this, you could spend a whole class just documenting violence and graphic trauma. And that is not what I want out of the class. I want students to engage with the reality of slavery.
Yeah.
But I try to stack texts next to each other that can kind of take us from the material lived conditions to maybe thinking about a writer writing about like power or freedom during this period, which is like a little bit, it's more engaged with hope and protest and less engaged with like the actual trauma.
Yeah.
So there's things like that. I also try to think about the ebbs and valleys of the semester and like, towards the end of this term, like we're doing way more short stories, we're doing way more poetry because that's the time where students get really stressed. And
the
a
attention
400-page novel is like not going to be the one that's people are going to. Sometimes in certain classes they will, like maybe a upper level like English class, I would push it. But usually I'm like, okay, people are gonna like want something a little bit easier to get through. And I'm someone who thinks cyclically, so I always want the last thing we read to connect back to the first thing we read.
Gotcha.
Because I think that helps with learning, right? It's like, I think the feeling of being able to look back on what you learned, and because there's some narrative thread, you understand how all the texts relate to each other and build on one another, because you can choose any text. Like, it's like, which slave narrative do we read? And it's like, okay, well, if I want to pull on this thread around like intersectionality or around motherhood or around the role of Christianity here, this teaching Harriet Jacobs narrative is like a good place to start.
Yeah.
But Frederick Douglass's narrative is also great, but it's good for other things, I think, depending on what other texts you want to teach, because a lot of these people are either literally or sort of figuratively in conversation with one another. So I have like a internal library that I'm just trying to figure out like what books make sense together.
Yeah.
And how much time do we have and what's the like rhythm of the semester.
Yeah.
And then every time I teach a class for the first time, I want to change something. And then I change it and I just keep changing it.
Yeah.
I'll probably always keep changing the classes.
Yeah. Now that's cool. That inherent like flexibility is like super, super cool. I think it's also super important when you're talking about something as as critical as African American literature. I think specifically as a people who were barred for so long from reading and writing, and thinking about that was not that long ago. So yeah, just hopping back into the conversation, we were talking about how you like really like structure a class and like what you want students to get from it. But I'm thinking of like when I was growing up and like the differences between like math class or history class and like a literature class was like with those there's a right answer, right? But as you were saying, like you're really looking for like what students are thinking. So like when you get into those scenarios when you might be opening up the conversation and you hear somebody who's like going into left field, how do you deal with that situation and, rein it back to like the topic without necessarily like inserting, your perspective in there?
It's tough because in a discussion-based class, and like this is something that I don't know that I could overemphasize how much it means to me. I never want a student to feel like they've been shut down or embarrassed and then they won't talk again. Like that's the worst case scenario, is that someone raises their hand and then my response feels like shame and then they don't talk again.
Yeah.
So it's hard because in order for everyone to learn, right, it's actually important for me to intervene when someone's going like way off the rails, because otherwise they'd be like, wait, is that what's happening? Or, but one of the things I try to emphasize when teaching literature is like, there is a part that's subjective. That's really the interpretive part.
Yeah.
But the observations, which is where you have to start, have to be factual. And then you build from there, right? So
it's like a common ground.
yeah,
but then like the branches are like subjective.
Yeah. So like if two characters are sisters, right? And that's a fact, right? And we can start there and then we can maybe disagree about how the author is playing with the power dynamic between them. But if someone misunderstands their relationship and thinks that they're friends or thinks that they're mother and daughter, that's just wrong, right? It's not right. And also it will probably lead to a weird interpretation because you've misunderstood the sort of what's actually happening in the text. So usually in those situations, I do one of two things. I ask students to explain themselves. And one of the things I think I'm pretty good at is that I'm a good listener. So I try to listen to what a student is saying and what they're saying behind what they're saying. Because sometimes it's like the observation they're making is actually right, but they kind of go left at the end.
Yeah.
So I try to sort of with them backtrack and be like, okay, I like what you said about this. I actually think if we look at the text, like let's go back to the facts, that it would be difficult to argue this because they use, this word, which suggests that they're angry and you're trying to make it seem like they were in love or that whatever, and I think with that, there's like some affirmation because it's like, that is a good observation. There's a part of this that you're getting right. Let's try to figure out where the misstep was. And I usually just use the text to do that because I think the text it speaks for itself. It's not going to shame you. It's not like you're wrong.
Right.
And it also, I think, models what I do when I'm reading, right? If I'm like, wait, do I understand this? It's like, let's just go back and read it again.
Yeah.
So, but it's tough because especially in classes that are a bit quieter, depends on the class dynamic. I've had classes where I have to stop people from talking because like everyone has so much to say. I've had classes where I have to be like, okay, I'm requiring people who have not spoken to say something now.
Yeah.
And in the quieter classes, it feels like higher stakes. I don't want students to be shut down. But I do try to like bring us back to the text or intervene in some way without like totally crushing the moment.
Yeah, no, for sure. I appreciate that because I think that's just like one of those things that I'm always curious about, of just thinking about, like there is a certain like level or I guess like a balance of the subjectivity to the objective. So I was just kind of curious about how do you do that with creating like a a comfortable environment as well. So that was super insightful. But I think that also brings me up with like one question of like, I guess as far as like large group conversations, what are like those differences between like when you hear something and you're like, oh, that's a good comment versus like, oh, this is like good interpretation. Like, what are like those differences for you?
It's usually specificity.
um, when students point out something in the text and then can kind of articulate why they think something's happening or connect it to something else that we've just read, like notice a pattern.
Yeah.
I'm like, those are the kinds of things that, like, you're basically on your way to writing a paper at that point. Like, you're developing a thesis essentially in real time. Um, which to me is like always very exciting. I think also when students build on what other people have said, to me that means that students are listening to each other, which is like the best case scenario, even more than listening to me. Because the ability to listen to what someone else says, connect it to what you're thinking, and build on that, to me, is also like it's really productive for the classroom. And also, it's why I like discussion because we're not all seeing the same things, right?
Right.
I mean, in a book that has maybe 80,000 words in it, it's we're not all paying attention to every single choice at all times.
Yeah.
And so I'm dependent even on students to bring in things. Especially books I've read a lot of times. I already know what I think. I already know what I think are the most interesting passages. I already know what characters I don't dislike. I want to know, like, what students say things all the times where I'm like, I've never noticed that, or I've never thought about it in that way. And when I say that, I'm not just sort of placating. Like, I love thinking about things in new ways. So when students can sort of especially challenge something I'm thinking or say like, oh, another way of thinking about this is X, Y, or Z, I'm always like really impressed.
No, for sure. Hey, look, that's some free game for anybody taking a literature class right now. But actually transitioning, so kind of getting you out of like your teacher brain and more into like you as like the actual like academic and like what you research and what your like projects are. Just curious about like, are you researching anything right now currently? And if so, like, what are some of those questions that you're kind of thinking about?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's like I'm really, really on the early stages of thinking about. So in some ways, it's good for me to talk about, but I guess just forgive me if it sounds
Yeah.
really convoluted.
Yeah.
But I've been thinking about intelligence recently, and so even though I study Black speculative fiction, so thinking about certain genres, really, I'm also interested in how Black people historically have speculated, right? Like, thought about envisioning new futures, who have engaged with, making use of horror to articulate Black experiences, um, to think about, someone like Sun Ra who's thinking about and using like space and Afrofuturistic symbols to imagine almost like a new Black world, so I think about those things. And I recently read, not very recently, I guess last year, I read this book called Death of the Author by Nnedi Okorafor. And that book is a book within a book. Like, basically it's about a woman who writes a book, and the book that she writes is in the book that you read. So you read the story that she wrote while also reading her story. It sounds it is kind of meta, but it sounds way more conceptual than it actually is, in the sense that it's a really enjoyable read. It doesn't
Gotcha.
feel like super disconnected. But the story she writes is about this robot, like an AI sentient robot who is in Nigeria. The world has ended. There's no more humans. And this particular robot is like obsessed with humanity and like wanting to consume human stories to understand humanness. And the kind of my reading of this novel is that it's essentially like a reminder that any kind of artificial intelligence we create is like a sort of reflection of the parts of our own humanity that we either like value or do not value. And so these humans have created an AI but sort of stripped the most like human characteristics from it. Anyways, this had me thinking about intelligence.
Yeah.
And I've been thinking about the ways that AI is being presented to us and who's presenting it to us, and why we would trust these white men who are billionaires to tell us what intelligence is, when historically, it's also been similar people who have looked at us in our eyes and told us that we are intellectually inferior,
Yeah.
right? So, um, I have been reading more about Phyllis Wheatley because I was sort of aware of this, but Phyllis Wheatley, who is like, I mean, she was enslaved as a child, brought to the United States, and is like one of the first published Black authors, poets. She was publishing from a young age or writing from a young age. And I think in 1772, I'm not a historian, I'm so bad with dates, 1772, 1774, she was basically brought into this conversation with a whole bunch of, like in Boston, with a whole bunch of sort of reputable white men, um, to basically verify that she wrote this stuff because they were like, she must be copying someone. This is an original work. They just could not compute she wrote this poetry. And so I've just been thinking about how we can think about this concept of intelligence, particularly as sort of a criticism, not of like the technology of AI, but like the way that it's being.
Yeah, kind of like how it's
Yeah.
been presented to us,
Yes.
and like who's having like their perspectives or like their agendas being pushed
Yes.
onto us.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also because it's kind of a similar like labor. And again, these are really preliminary thoughts, but I'm just thinking about the mirror of a time in enslavement, right? Where you're profiting off of unpaid labor
Yeah.
and bodies and sort of insisting that these people are not your equals, to a moment where they're trying to create, again, a kind of, if you think about AI, like
Something for you
agents,
to
is like,
offload
yes, an
onto.
offload labor.
Yeah.
And to use this rhetoric around like intelligence and like, I'm suspicious
That's
of
actually.
what this is supposed to be.
Yeah.
And why, again, I don't know that what they think of as intelligence is what intelligence is, particularly because the ways that they're trying to demonstrate this intelligence is by definition mimicry. It's not actual, like creative, original thought, which is the same thing that has been denied to Black people for all of this time. And I'm interested in putting these pieces together. So that's what I've been thinking about.
That is hella interesting. I was just thinking, like, and this was like years ago, but like I did have like that thought that like AI is kind of like, these are like the new slaves, like if you really think about it, because like with slavery, the idea was to be able to basically have a human that was a livestock that you can just offload all of this work onto, but you would still get like the human result because obviously Black people are humans. So I was just thinking about like those ways that like they're actually trying to like create like neural networks and like databases that can, well, they'll never replicate like what a human can do. But just thinking about the fact that they're trying to like offload that, and I even connected to the fact of like a lot of the job security that we think about with like these AI like potentially replacing them, a lot of those jobs would be places where Black people are actually working too. So like what is that connection there? I think that's a topic for a whole different episode though. But I was just curious to see like what you were kind of thinking as far as like you do like, you know, obviously do a lot for like your students to like think about what they're thinking about, but I think also, you know, it's important to think about what you all are working on. So I appreciate you sharing that. But I also want to connect maybe to like this topic of black speculative fiction overall. And I'm just curious about like what like drew you towards it, but then also like, and I think from the outside looking in, I might be able to think about what this tradition makes possible. But I'm curious, like from your perspective, what do you think that like the value of this tradition is, and what do we really gain from it?
Yeah. I mean, the value to me is in part that, and this sounds so simple, but if you were to just Google African American literature, the books that would come up are mostly engaged with like struggle or protest in some way. And I think there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah.
Some of my favorite books fall within that sort of tradition. Again, that's a broad brush. I'm sure there's many examples that are outliers, but generally speaking, I don't know how many people realize that Black people have also always written about other things.
Mm.
Like Du Bois wrote a whole bunch of weird fiction and
Mm.
science fiction too, right? So it's not what we read in the classroom, but I think to imagine him, subscribing to like amazing stories and being excited to read these things,
Mhm.
and it's a tradition that continues. Like I think that when people see like you know, Ryan Coogler in Sinners or they're thinking about Jordan Peele's films, it seems like, oh wow, this is this cool new thing that Black people are doing. But it's actually like it's always been happening, right? These
Mm.
using these genres to both represent various aspects of the Black experience, but also like the lived realities. Like I think, something like Get Out, it's like how could you ever talk about that palpable sense of maybe anxiety or alienation of being the one person in a white room when things turn like left a bit?
Mm.
You could, I mean, represent it in a real way, but like I think the film symbolically gets at it in a way that you just couldn't otherwise, really.
Yeah.
So the value to me is that like one, there's more forms of Black literature than what is most commonly discussed. And I think that a lot of these texts deserve the kind of literary attention
Yeah.
and not just seen as like escapism or entertainment. And the ways that they contend with issues is opens up ways of talking about things that are not we don't always have language for, right? Like,
Mhm.
you know, I think, that's if you're thinking about like that scene in Sinners where he's playing the music and then like basically everyone's ancestors are like
Yeah.
moving there. I mean, how could you describe the feeling of hearing something that feels so deeply connected to a past and it feels like in your body and you're sharing it collectively? There's no way to represent that without
Mm.
some kind of non-realistic element where it's
Right.
like,
And that's for the fiction. Yeah.
yes, yeah. So I think there's just, I mean, not to mention it's fun. Like vampires are fun, aliens are fun. Like this is all fun stuff.
Yeah.
But also, I do think that it just opens up new ways of like representing experiences and also people who have historically have not been able to like see themselves in certain narratives. I think it's like a way to articulate some of those experiences as well because you can build worlds, right? So if you want to build a world where gender doesn't determine your role in society, but Blackness is still plays a role
Mm.
culturally, you can because it's not real,
Right. Yeah.
Um,
For sure.
and so for me, there's value in thinking about the ways that what would otherwise be metaphorical becomes real in these texts. And also, I think it's a great place for Black people to theorize just about like what it means to be Black, about
Mhm.
how to build better societies, to critique the world we live um, in ways that are not as easy to do in a kind of like when you're dependent on realism.
Yeah,
Hmm.
for sure. No, I appreciate that answer because I think the first time I really heard the term Black speculative fiction might have been reading, like, I read your bio
Hmm.
before I reached out.
Hmm.
Yeah, I think that was like the first time I really heard that
Hmm.
term. I think like a lot of like what comes up for me when thinking about it is just thinking of two things. One, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but I just think that it's just so interesting that as like if you look at Black people in America, we have been free for less years than we were enslaved.
Hmm.
And we also, in those years of freedom, it has not necessarily been free. So thinking about like what the future lies, or like what the future may look like, I think that's a lot of
Hmm.
that power of that speculative aspect of it.
Hmm.
And then also kind of what you were saying of like being able to take away like those real world constraints and like imagine what would, or like what could be if
Hmm.
not for all of, these historical realist aspects that
Hmm.
kind of are limiting our imagination.
Hmm.
So I like that you broke that down. Also, I'm curious to hear a little bit more because I know that you said that you teach a class about like Black horror.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of just want to get like a high level understanding. I know like you can't teach the whole class
Yeah,
like
yeah.
in a few minutes, but kind of just like what is that class getting at, and
Yeah.
what are some of like those main takeaways that you're trying to get your students to really walk away from that class with?
Yeah. Well, so the class is really technically it's race and gender.
Mm-hmm.
And so I start by just having students think about the genre. Like genres are interesting because there's things that like we know how to enter into genres, even if you've never taken a class. Like this is also what I love about literature. I think that people love stories, and it's basically I don't know anyone who hasn't engaged with storytelling in their life. Like it's how we communicate.
Yeah, for sure.
And so even if you're not a reader, you can have a conversation about a narrative. Like that's just one of the things I like. That's like a certain level of accessibility there. Um and it makes sense. Like you don't have doesn't have to explain what a story is. You like know what a character is, you know what the plot is, even if you've never really talked about what those things are. And so horror is an interesting genre because, it's kind of it's has this sort of unique relationship to what's symbolic.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the ways of thinking about horror is through kind of like psychoanalysis, so thinking about like your unconscious, what you're secretly afraid of, what you're like repressing, what's deep anxieties, right? Those kinds of things. And also connected to like a Gothic tradition. So thinking about the genre and then thinking about like the sort of tropes within the genre, right? So thinking about the idea of like monstrosity, thinking about the idea of haunting, and then thinking about metaphorically sort of what does that do? Like we engage with stories all the time about, if you are interested in horror, like demon possession or something like that. And it's like, what are these really about? Like, why are humans obsessed with these types of stories?
Right.
And thinking about like, what's the utility, right? Like, is the fear around, like a lack of autonomy? Is it a fear of the other? Is like, what are these, and some tropes in horror have historically, been really harmful to people of color, right? Like describing certain forms of like spiritual practices as inherently demonic, and then those characters end up always being sort of villainous. Particularly like if you were to read like Lovecraft's work, it's like there's always some seedy other doing some kind of mystical ritual thing. But he was notoriously really, really racist. But also things like, thinking about the way that haunted houses, especially when used by like women writers, can also be able to represent the sort of like imprisonment of the home,
Yeah.
or the kinds of like sort of horrors or violences against women or captivity. And so, with Black writers, I think Toni Morrison's Beloved is one of the texts that we read in that class, is because that text has haunting in it, but it's not really often read as horror. But the haunting is like the whole point of the book, really. And I don't know that you could articulate some of those things without this ghost that's living amongst these characters.
Yeah.
And also thinking about how these writers revise ideas of horror. For example, if you are treated as the monster, you become the monster. You can take revenge as the monster. You can embrace monstrosity. So thinking about horror where you can like sort of take back some of these ideas that are placed on to people. And yeah, so and also thinking about ways to analyze texts that maybe do hold more harmful ideas or problematic, I guess I'll say, and being able to still analyze and engage them by sort of picking apart where those anxieties come from, right? Like, oh, this author's fear of racial mixing is why they have created these like hybrid human demon characters as a way to like, demonstrate what they think is like the ultimate horror in, an increasingly diverse society.
Yeah.
So things like that. Or that class, we also read some body horror, mainly by like trans authors, and thinking about like sort of reclaiming the body through that genre, or that like, often very graphic, violent type texts that are then sort of reframed. Yeah, it's a really fun class, and it's a class I've only taught once. So the next time I'll teach it again. I'll probably do it a little bit differently and some new texts.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just want students to like be able to think about what the genre allows for groups who are marginalized, and I think that's often the same groups that find horror to be a really like intriguing genre.
For sure. I kind of want to do a thing similar with another class. I wasn't able to take it,
Mhm.
but I've heard really great things about it. But it's
Mhm.
Black feminist literature.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
I'm just kind of curious, and like that same understanding of like from a high level perspective of like what that class is all about,
Mhm.
what you're hoping that students walk away from, and then like what are like some of your I guess like favorite things to like I guess what are your favorite parts about teaching that class?
Yeah. Well, I'll start with my favorite part of teaching that class, because one of the things that I like about that class is um, I can unapologetically just teach exclusively Black women,
Mm-hmm.
which, there's almost no other class where I would do that. I'm usually really conscious of trying to find balance of like, where people are from, the types of voices in a given class. I just think it's important.
Mm-hmm.
But in that class, I'm just like, it's only Black women. I don't have to feel bad about it only being Black women. I don't have to like sort of negotiate or explain why. I think people come into the class expecting that.
Mm-hmm.
So it just sets a different tone where I'm not needing to justify why we're reading these texts.
Yeah.
Um, Ultimately, that class, I want people to sort of understand what Black feminist thought theory is, right? Like, what does it mean to sort of read these writers who are really prioritizing their theory out of experience, like lived experience? And I think that applies to all students, right? Like, I think there's something like deeply empowering about these women, most of whom are not academics, right? But
Mm-hmm.
who are choosing to f- write about and articulate a theory based on their own existence, right? The only reason they know that there's like something different about being a Black woman than being a white woman and being a Black man is because of the intersection of those experiences, right? And
Mm.
so trying to, through those experiences, then writing about the knowledge that comes from that. So I want students to be able to recognize a form of knowledge production
Mm.
that it's like from experience, right? Which anyone has access to. Like that
For
means
sure.
we all can do that.
For sure.
And I think it's highly undervalued. And so, um, I don't spend too much time talking about like epistemology or anything, but I
Mm.
do think, for example, like with students, I'll mention like in a world where medical professionals would tell you that Black people feel less pain, and Black people themselves are saying, ouch, that hurts, whose knowledge gets valued, right? Like one of these is supposed to be objective, rational science. The others is just purely experience.
Mm.
And most of the time, the way that we're conditioned and trained is to think that like the rational observational science is always 100% like infallible. And this is not me trying to critique scientists, but
Yeah.
to value like there's real truth and in the knowledge that comes purely from experience. Because
For sure.
who's right in that situation? The person who is definitely still in pain, or the person who's claiming that there's no way you could be in pain because we've
Because this
scientifically
says
proved
so.
you don't
Right.
experience pain, right?
Yeah.
And so if you really value that, there's actually more knowledge like accessible to you from your experiences. And these Black women are writing, framing that, right, which is what they know through lived experience as theory. And so yeah, that's why I love teaching it. And then I try to bridge that with text that demonstrates the many, many, many ways that Black women have engaged with the intersections of those experiences of like childhood, sexuality, marriage, labor, sisterhood, healing, trauma, all of those things.
Mhm.
Um, through that lens, right? Which is to again really like center Black women in these narratives of Black history, but also in their own expressions of their lived experiences.
Yeah, for sure. No, like, and one thing that I really want to do with that is like, unfortunately, was not able to take the class. So I kind of just wanted to like get like a good gist of like what,
Mhm.
not what I was missing, but just like what can people expect from a class
Mhm.
like that? 'Cause I feel like it's super important.
Mhm.
Especially because just thinking about the ways that, like, we are kind of or we're taught, like, a mythologized version of, like, Black history or,
Mhm.
like, I think a good way to say it is, like, we just have a very limited, Black historical memory sometimes
Mhm.
where we might think that it's just all Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, but we
Yes.
never really think about the women who make up the Black
Mhm.
community or the queer people who
Mhm.
make up the Black community and, like, the different ways that, like, those perspectives were super, like, foundational to, like,
Mhm.
a lot of, like, our progress that we made as a
Mhm.
community, like, thinking back to, like, the civil rights movement that, like, we were really making strides, not because we were moving off of a single leader, but, like, we were exercising, like, group-centered
Mhm.
leadership where it was, like, the collective, and a lot of that was Black women. So, yeah, I just really liked hearing about that, because like I said, I'm about to graduate, so I won't be able to take the class,
Yeah, well, I'll
but
send you the syllabus if you wanna know what we read.
I definitely read it over. But I think that transitions me into kind of like you may just stop and then so to Bennett. Yeah. Okay. Well, what we'll do is we're kind of gonna like go into a like a landing. I'm gonna
Mhm.
do that one that's on your left, the left one. I think that would be good. But we're kind of gonna put it into the garage now. Gonna be asking about any books that you would like to recommend?
Mhm.
Book
Mhm.
recs, favorite memories as teaching,
Mhm.
and then just like open the space to just anything that we haven't covered, anything like last kind of
Mhm.
like thoughts that you want to put out there. Um, and then yeah, and I'll ask you. This can kind of help you. Give you a little heads up. I'm going to ask you who's one person that you want to see on the show.
Oh,
But you'll
okay,
have to
cool.
help me like connect with them to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
them on the
yeah. No,
show.
I can do that,
But
yeah.
yeah, that's kind of like how we'll finish up.
Mhm.
Yeah, so going good. Definitely been like a really full conversation. I feel like I've been learning a lot. But one thing that's been coming up for me, like with the horror
Mhm.
conversation, is I'm actually drafting like a video essay to talk about sinners,
Mhm.
and I think my thesis is going to be about how it's a cultural technology to talk about things like those spiritual divides in the community,
Mhm.
like the divides that we have along like just religion,
Mhm.
religious expression, but also cultural technology to really like reframe our Black historical memory. Because I feel like that setting was very intentional with like it being
Mhm.
1932, where somebody can like drive a car, but it's also somebody like in a mule drawn cart,
Mhm.
but then it's also like they're sharecropping. So
Mhm.
like I think that's like one of those things that like it's a great example of like how you can use like a film to kind of like educate, and not in a way that like you're just sitting there and like being lectured to, but like you're actually like, wow, like there was an overlap in time where like there are Black people living in Chicago being gangsters and stuff,
Mhm.
but there's also Black people down in the South,
Mhm.
picking cotton. So
Mhm.
that was really like coming up for me, especially the the talking points about like how horror is used, because I
Mhm.
think that like the way that it's used in Sinners is to talk about like vampirism as a parallel to colonization and
Mhm.
like this creation of like a hive mind and
Mhm.
like that stripping of like what makes you you.
Mhm.
So yeah, like those
Yeah.
things are like really coming up for me when you were talking about like Black horror.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's interesting, and I think Black people historically have, like, been really interested in using vampires to do other
Hmm.
things, um, which is interesting, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Um, I really did. All right, cool. Well, wrapping the conversation up, because you are a professor of literature, I would imagine that you would have a great book rec list. So, yeah, just maybe like three or so books that you would recommend for,
Mhm.
and to be a little bit more specific, like let's think about like a foundational understanding of Blackness through literature. What would be
Okay.
some of those books that you would recommend, for somebody wanting to start off?
Hmm. This is a great question, and I've never thought about it in this way. Wait, can you repeat a sort of a foundational understanding of Blackness
Yeah, through
through
literature.
literature?
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe giving you 3 might be too limiting, but just
Yeah, but I'm trying to, like, sort of think about what I think would be and also, I'm a huge advocate of reading, books that are there are books that are enriching, but they're not as enjoyable,
Mm,
and there are books that are really entertaining, but they don't really offer you much to change you,
yeah.
and I think there are books that can kinda hit both, so, um, I guess I'll try to choose texts that, like, if you are someone who is resistant, you're like, "Ugh, I can never finish a book," Um, what would I wanna read?
Mhm.
I think one of my favorite books of all time, which is, um, to me, just, like, beautiful in every way, is Maud Martha, by Gwendolyn Brooks, from 1953, and she is a Black woman from Chicago, and that book is basically kind of like a coming of age story, but each chapter is only a couple of pages, and they're basically like little vignettes
Mhm.
that follow this one girl through life. But what I like about it is there's something so Gwendolyn Brooks is like also a poet, like probably not even probably, she's more well known as a poet.
Mm.
So you can kind of see that in the work, but it is not poetic in the sense that it feels like not a narrative. It's definitely there's a characters, things happen, but it's about the beauty in normal people's lives, right? Like she doesn't. It's not a book about how she like goes off to New York and then becomes famous. It's not a book about like um really challenging racism. It's just like her
Mm.
in her life, and there's something. The first section is basically Maud Martha is described by all of the things that she likes, right? And I just think it's perfect. It's, like,
Mm.
beautiful. It makes you everyone could write that book. I think that's how I feel about it. It's, like, not technically, I mean, Gwendolyn Brooks is a brilliant writer,
Yeah.
but I mean technically the ability to value your life as big or as small as it
Mhm.
is captured in that book, and technically anyone could just decide that they're going to write little clips of their life, so that's definitely one, and I think, it's not like a traditional novel, and it's also a pretty quick read, but you can I go back and read it all the time. Um, wow, there's some really great honestly, I think that you have to read a slave narrative if you wanna understand
Mm.
especially Black American experiences or the Americas largely,
Mhm.
and also some of the, like, concerns of that period. I think Frederick Douglass's is, like, a solid one to go with, but
Yeah.
it's yeah, I mean, I just think if you're like, "I wanna get into African American literature," or "I wanna be able to understand this more," I think starting there helps.
Mhm.
Um, and then hmm, I'm trying to think of something contemporary that I think is, like sort of gets at something I'm talking about. Mm, one book I do really like teaching that is prose poetry is Citizen by Claudia Rankine, which is like 2016, I think. And it's a combination of like art, like there's photography, there's pictures of sculptures, and then poetry in it. But it's also like multivocal. Like she essentially interviewed a lot of her friends about their
Gotcha.
microaggressions they'd experienced with blackness, and then incorporates them into this text, and it's all written in the second person, so it feels like you are experiencing the things that are happening in the book. I feel like I'm gonna feel really bad about this list that I just came up with, but that's like what
Yeah.
I can come up at the top of my head.
Okay.
Mhm.
Cool. And then I don't know why it keeps dying.
It's okay.
Is it dying or is it just like cutting out?
I usually just cut it out because the line just put in was
100%?
yeah, it was 100%.
Yeah.
So just restarting.
Well, we're wrapping up, so shouldn't be too bad. Well, we're gonna go to kind of like a teaching memory.
Mhm.
So I think the way I'll phrase it is like just kind of like what is going to be like one thing that like a student said, or like what's something that like you realized that like really like stuck with you, you know, like
Mm-hmm.
what's one of like those most like salient memories that you have from teaching. Then yeah, we'll ask about who you want to see on the show, anything else you want to leave the audience with,
Yeah.
and then we'll close out.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm.
We should be out there.
all right, cool. And then I think one question, as far as wrapping up, I'm thinking about is like, what's a teaching moment that you still think about as far as it might be something that like a student said, or just like a memory in the classroom that really like made you feel like, yeah, this work really does matter. What's something that's coming up in that area for you?
Mm. This is probably a good thing, but I can't think of like one specific moment necessarily. Um, I think it's pretty common that I have moments where I'm just genuinely feel really proud of
Mm,
the work that students do.
yeah.
Um, I think especially, the world's been kind of crazy. It's like there's a lot happening.
Mm-hmm.
I don't envy being 20, 21, 22 years old at this particular time. I think it's just like there's a lot happening in the world. So I think just in general, I really admire students' ability to like still engage and still like challenge themselves, still like show up. Like there's been days where, what's happening in the news is genuinely like craziness,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And then I'll come to class and I'll be thinking like, I hope students are like okay mentally, emotionally. Like I don't want to bring the outside stuff in all the time because for some people this is like the reprieve from that.
Mm,
And so to engage with students who are still like, we read for colored girls in Black feminist literature, and that is a text that is like heavy and it's hard. It's also like a difficult text in the sense of like the way that it's written.
mm,
And I can't even remember because so much has happened in the world, but one of the crazy things that has happened was happening during that class. And I remember being nervous just about showing up and being like, I wonder if they've read. Is this going to be too much on top of everything else?
mm.
And people were like more than ready, had so many great things to say, were like drawing connections between other texts. And those are moments where I'm just like, oh, this is why I love doing this. And it makes me also feel hopeful about the world in general.
For sure.
Um, because at least the part of your generation that I come in contact with, it's like, you guys are going to be good,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's a good like. I was definitely not gonna try to dance around like the fact that like it's a lot of like real world shit going
Mm-hmm.
on, but like I appreciate like the intentionality that you take as far as just like an educator and thinking about like how you want to show up for people who are going through such
Mm-hmm.
let alone like all the crazy stuff in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Thinking about like, yeah, I gotta go to class,
Yeah.
I gotta go to
And
work,
work.
I gotta
Yeah.
do all these other
And take
like,
care of family.
yeah,
And
for sure,
it's like, I mean, it's hard. Like people have like real, real, real lives.
for sure.
And so, there's times where I'm like, why does what am I doing matter? But I'm like, okay, no, they wanted to be here.
Yeah,
So like my job is to run the class the best that I can.
that's beautiful. I think one last question is if you could see anybody on Truth to Power
Mm-hmm.
having a conversation with me, who would it be? But you would need to help me have a handoff with that person.
Hmm. I'm not sure exactly of the people you've had
Mhm.
doing this. There's two people who come to mind. I just recently did the African American Studies program put on like a Black faculty flash
Flash
talk
talk.
situation.
Mhm.
And so there are two faculty members who I always enjoy being around and listening to them speak. But one is Emile Lawrence. I don't know if you've had her
I
on
got
the
class with her
podcast,
in
but
like a hour.
I think she's like just like a really great teacher, and I'd never seen her in that mode. Like I've been in a lot of contacts with her, but not her talking about math.
Mhm.
And I just think that's also a path that a lot of students, especially Black students, just like can't imagine themselves in.
Mm.
Just because it's like not really a public facing, when you meet public academics, they're usually like historians or sociologists.
Right.
They're rarely like mathematicians. And so I think
I don't know. And also she's just a great person.
Yeah, for sure.
And then also Zachary Reese, who's in psychology. And I always, every time I listen to him talk about, because I think he does like social psychology or like relational psychology.
Mhm.
Anytime I hear him talk about what he knows, it genuinely improves my life because I'm like, oh wait, like this is going to help me solve problems in life. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? Like just really thinking about, like he in his flash talk talked about people's perceptions around bragging to friends. Like people are always afraid they're going to like say too much or their friends are going to think they're bragging, but the research basically suggests that like nobody feels that way, but people are so happy to hear what their friends are doing. And in fact, sometimes feel bad when they hear about good news from someone else and the friend didn't tell them. They're like, wait, why didn't you tell me you got a new job? Or, you know, but whenever when I hear him talk about those things, I'm like, oh, wow, this is like can change the way people like make friendships, like engage in relationships. Like,
Yeah.
It's just such valuable information.
For sure.
So yeah, those are two people.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I actually don't need you to do a handoff then because I know them actually pretty well.
Yeah.
I literally have class with Dr. Lawrence like in an hour.
Oh, cool. Which class is it?
My Black Scholar capstone.
Oh, cool.
The second part
That's
of it.
awesome.
But yeah, wrapping up, I do always want to give my guests a space to just say anything to the audience or just maybe just leave us with a message and then we close the show out. So if there's anything on your heart, anything that you should like to say to the people, I'll give you the space.
One thing that I've been thinking about, and maybe as you're wrapping up college, you might be thinking about this. Because one thing you mentioned when I first walked in is that this is kind of like a time capsule, right? And I think part of that is moments to slow down. Like to me, the less is more. And I know that's easier said than done, but I think that slowing down, especially when you're feeling the pressure to speed up, is really important. And this is sort of connected to a larger thing, but I think that we as Black people deserve the space to like take time to reflect, to connect, to like breathe, to like and it one is good for you physically, mentally, but
For
also
sure.
it's like it helps you learn. It helps like expand the way that you think, right? Like spending quiet time alone, thinking, journaling, writing, whatever. So I think I just encourage people to like, in the same way that you create space for other parts of your health and well-being, like time to work out every day or make sure you get good sleep, is to like take care of your mental and like intellectual health in the same way, you know, like you can really actually, just be in a place where you know what you think and you feel confident about what you know and what you've learned. And that is hard to do when you're like in like pure survival mode. And I wish that earlier in my own life, someone had been like, hey, like it's okay to just slow down a little bit because you'll remember more and you'll enjoy it more. So I'm, as you're doing this, one of the benefits is that like you kind of have these check-in points with people who are around you, right? To like remember what you know and remember what you've learned and to like reflect on your own growth. And I just think that's invaluable.
Yeah, no, that's super powerful. And that's kind of like, that's the whole idea of speaking truth to power, right? Just being able to bring up something that's powerful, that's salient. And I really think that you hit the nail on the head with that. And I'll definitely take that to heart with me. But I'm going to use this as a time to close out the conversation and say thank you all for watching yet another episode of Truth to Power. And Dr. Hunt, thank you for joining me.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yes.